We'll begin with in our normal fashion with a roll call. Alternate trustee to Metro Center Mud, Arthur Bredehoff.
Yes, sir.
Alternate trustee to Mud 1, Bob Lilac. Bob Lilac is here, but he's out for a critical moment. Make it check in later again. Trustee Neil Gaynor.
Here.
Trustee Brad Hauk.
Here.
Trustee Kent Maggard.
Here.
Trustee Keith Lincoln.
Here.
Trustee David Smith.
Here.
Trustee Hugh Cannett.
Here.
Trustee Bob Lux is here. Trustee Paul Martin.
Here.
Very good. We have a full attendees quorum. We'll begin in the normal fashion with our invocation and pledges of allegiance. Heavenly Father, we come to you today as an assembled body. We humbly request that you bless our meeting, our community, and our nation. Help us to work diligently, always for the common good and in the best interest of those who we have been elected to represent. Guide us to be insightful and prudent in our intentions, visions, plans, deliberations, decisions, and their fulfillment. Work through us to provide a spirit of welcome to all in attendance, to engage in respectful and thoughtful dialogue and discussion with understanding, wisdom, and humility. Amen. Amen. If you wish, prior to reciting the pledges, please take an additional moment of silent prayer or reflection in the manner of your preference. Thank you. Pledge to the United States of America, flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
With liberty and justice for all.
justice for all.
Pledge to the Texas flag.
On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any requests for public comments? Okay, good. Just as a beginning, in case anyone in the audience or later on a video is wondering, why are we having this meeting? This meeting is in some way a continuation of the Board of Trustees' regular monthly meeting of April 9th, 2025. A request was made by several trustees to question or obtain clarification for information which was earlier presented. But that we do this revisit prior to the upcoming May 8th all mud meeting so that we wouldn't be trying to play catch up. That meeting will occur prior to what will be our regular May Board of Trustees meeting. So that said, I'll recognize Connie Curtis, Manager of Operations and Technical Services for SJRA, to begin the discussion. Thank you, Connie.
I'll work on the computer really quickly. Make sure that we get it shared and pulled out. Thank you. Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you, trustees, for having us here. As Director Lux said, for those of you that don't remember me, I'm Connie Curtis. I'm the Director of Technical and Operational Services with the San Jacinto River Authority. So Mira Victor is also here with me from Carollo this evening. So we're going to have a two-part presentation here. I'm going to present a little bit on the master plan review. So there have been some specific questions on what the treatment facility number 1's basin is, projected annual average flows, and then capacity recommendations. So I'm going to cover that information this evening. We have a whole matrix of questions that we've received from different directors, and so that's going to be something that comes out a little later. It's not something that we're going to try to cover all the questions that we've received this evening, but we're going to try to hit the highlights. And what I'm going to do is actually review some of the information that we received from Friesen Nichols within their master plan. So it's information that for some of you all who've been here, it should be information that's familiar, but it's some questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions through that information. And then Mira is actually going to present on some other information on criteria used for capacity evaluations, existing hydraulic capacity, process, repair and place options, and then some of the NPV analysis assumptions, okay? So with that, in typical fashion, if you can, let me try to get through my presentation, and then we can come back with questions. We're going to take a break between mine and Mira's presentations for questions, because there are two separate topics that we're kind of talking about this evening. So with that, I'm going to get started. So basin number one, so we wanted to bring in a map. I think this was a request from one of the directors to kind of just show and clarify what the boundaries of the different treatment facilities are. So the green area is the boundary for wastewater treatment facility number one. The orange is for treatment facility number two, and the purple is for treatment facility number three. With that, interestingly enough, treatment facility number one receives effluent from every mud district except for 39. So just for anybody who's curious about that, there are some different muds who kind of overlap in different ways, and every single mud except for 39 contributes to treatment facility number one. So this is the basin. This is when we talk about facility one, this is the basin that contributes to it. Next up here, I want to talk really quickly and briefly. If y'all recall, any mud director who was a mud director as of May or June of 2024 should have received a blue USB drive from the River Authority and from Woodlands Water. And so it had every document that was associated with the Friesen Nichols strategic plan, right? And so hopefully y'all have that. If not, let us know. We can get those documents back to you. But this evening, I'm going to speak from two of the different documents that are on there. And so that if you want to reference them, it should be fairly simple to do. There is R. So if you go to the USB, they're labeled like A through V, I believe. And so R is the meeting notes, but also the PowerPoint presentation from the June 27, 2023 All Mud meeting. So that was the first All Mud meeting in 2023 that we had as phase two of the strategic plan. So some of you, that might have been the first time that you attended an All Mud meeting, but I'm going to present some slides from that presentation this evening. The second document that I think is of note is document U on that USB. It's the phase two facility master plan from January 15th, 2024 from Friesen Nichols. So those two documents, once again, are on your USB. I'm not necessarily going to reference them directly, but there's a lot of information I think that can help answer some of the questions that are within those two documents. So as we move forward this evening, once again, hopefully this is some information that is familiar to you. And for those that are newer mud directors that maybe came in 2024, this is maybe the first time you're hearing it live, but it is some information that has been presented before. So with that, this is the cover slide from the Friesen Nichols presentation. So the phase two facility master plan from June 27th. I'm not going to do the whole presentation. I've pulled out the section here about the average day capacity optimization analysis. And so this is just a section from that presentation, but these are slides that are verbatim from Friesen Nichols. So this is consistent information that you would have received in 2023. Y'all as trustees are very aware what an SFDUE is, and so it's one single family unit, and that can be equivalent to more of that if you're in a commercial development. The way that you project into the wastewater flow is projected SFDUEs by the planning criteria. The current and existing planning criteria is 217 gallons per day per SFDUE, so that's what's been approved. Just for note, there is one single planning criteria. We use 217 gallons per day per SFDUE for the whole of the Woodlands. So it's not broken up by different basin. And that'll be an important thing to note as we move forward. But once again, you take one SFDUE times 217. And so for one SFDUE, it would be 217 gallons per day. That's the way the math works out. So with that, moving into actual planning criteria and an analysis of the wastewater flows per SFDUE. So this is something that if you take the number of purchased SFDUEs that we've received from the Woodlands Water Association. So one of the questions is where did y'all get your SFDUEs from? So Friesen Nichols worked with Woodlands Water at the time in 2022 into 2023 and received the most updated land use database at that time. And then they worked with Melissa over at Hark to make sure any anomalies were worked through. And so that is the result, is this teal color. So you take the purchased SFDUEs times the 217, and that results in the flow. And you see the adjustments that happen over time as more SFDUEs were purchased. The black line on the bottom is your historical average daily flow, right? So we hear sometimes that, you know, what is purchased versus what we actually see at the plants is different. And this is actually a pretty good graphical representation of that. So what you have purchased as MUDs is in teal. What is in black is what we see at the flow at the plant on an average daily flow. The red line at the top is the current permitted average daily flow at 7.8 MGD. So that is the permitted capacity for average daily flow at the plant. So at plant 1. What Friesen Nichols went and did was for the utilizing the latest annual SFDUE. So like I said, they worked specifically and directly with authorization from Woodlands Water with Hark. To make sure that all of the data was consistent. So 6th and final accounting was completed in 2017. Things changed in between. Hark was adjusting as they were going as well as things were changing on the ground. So in late 2022, they updated the information to the most recent and updated information at that time.
Pardon me, what's a Hark?
Oh, Hark is the it's the company that y'all work with from a Woodlands Water perspective that does and manages the GIS. Eric, you.
Houston Area Research Center.
Sorry for that, Mr. Maggard. Thank you.
Questions? Research.
Yes, apologies for that. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So thank you for that. We worked with Melissa over at Hark, who y'all with Woodlands Water manages that land use database. From there, they then estimated the utilized SFDUE based on a couple of different things. So when you think about what's utilized, that is the difference between that teal bar that went up versus the historical on the bottom. And so we talked with the developers about commercial and multifamily occupancy. So when you think about it, there's maybe some commercial that has vacancies in it. There's maybe multifamily that's only 70% full. So when we're doing planning, we have to assume with those SFDUEs that they're all full. We have to plan for that, but the reality is, and what we see at the plant is it's something less, right? Historical hotel occupancy, it's the same thing. We worked with Visit the Woodlands to get data from them of, hey, if it's a 100-room hotel, they're not always at 100% capacity. Maybe they're at 70, maybe they're at 60. So we take that into consideration to build the utilized number. Constructed versus purchased SFDUEs. That's the same thing. You may have a lot in your neighborhood that is a contributing SFDUE, but it's not built yet. So it actually is not contributing any effluent to the plant. And then historical demographics were also reviewed with the developers in the Woodlands. So an example here of the differences that you would have seen between what is the total SFDUE purchased in the land use database for treatment facility 1 was 24,787 versus the utilized from 2022 SFDUEs of 18,169. So for a basin, plant 1's basin, there was 6,618 variation there, okay? So that means that 6,618 were not utilized, and that makes a difference. So if you go and look and say, all right, from the original land use database, this is where the teal bar is. If you calculate it with the revised reduction in SFDUEs that was analyzed over that time, then you see that teal bar drop. So it's still times the 217. So remember, the component that makes the teal bar is the number of SFDUEs, right? And in this case, the utilized number of SFDUEs times 217 gives the teal bars. So if we then say, I really want that teal bar to be closer to the black line, right? We're calibrating. We're trying to calibrate this number. Well, let's go see what we can do with the historic flow that we see, which is the black line, and divide that by the utilized number of SFDUEs that we've determined is actually projecting and contributing to the plant. And let's figure out what the updated planning criteria is. So we did that for both plant 2 and plant 1 because they're the major contributing plants in the Woodlands. And we look at it, it's actually 200 gallons per day per unit at plant 2. And it's 191 at plant 1. Since we use one planting criteria for all of the woodlands, we want to be conservative, and we're going to go with that maximum from plant 2, which is 200 gallons per day. So we take 217 and we lower it to 200. And let's go look and see what happens to our graphs. And so what you see is that bar drops even further and closer to that black line, which is essentially a calibration. So as we proceed forward, permitted average daily flow is 7.8. The SFDUEs times a new planning criteria of 200 gallons per day per SFDUE results in something much closer to the historical. And so that's where the planning criteria of 200 gallons per day per SFDUE comes from. Okay. Once you're done with the planning criteria, we move on to the projections of the SFDUEs. So that's an assessment of the number of projected SFDUEs for this particular basin. This particular slide, I think, is of interest to many people. So let's start with existing. So the teal portions here are the existing from 2022. So once again, this is something where the sixth and final accounting was done in 2017. Hark, who works on behalf of Woodlands Water, continuously updates those numbers to make sure that developments and things are reflected, projections are updated. Freese and Nichols worked directly with Hark on those updates, and the numbers and the best information that they had at the time of this study in June of 2023 were the numbers that are shown here. So the 18,169 is the existing number from the 2022 SFDUEs. Okay, those were adjusted for like occupancy and construction status, but that is what we received from and working with Woodlands Water's consultant essentially. From there, on top of it, you have the purchase not constructed, right? And so that's the section when you get into the tenure, and then the build out is a crosshatch. That's 8,430. That is the remaining purchased SFDUEs that you all have based on your land use database, also adjusted with some of that work with Melissa over at Hark. So if y'all are attempting to compare these numbers directly back to the sixth and final, they're not going to match exactly. And so if there's some confusion on that, that's why there was some adjustments made. But that's where those baseline numbers, and that totals to 26,599 total at the end of the 10-year build out and the ultimate build out shown. On top of that, for any good master plan that you do for a municipal entity or a municipality, you want to understand what developers are up to and what development is occurring. So if you're working in Pearland or Baytown or Sugarland, you're going to have conversations about what's happening in an ETJ, or you're going to have conversations of like what's maybe not in a boundary, but you know that development is coming. And so that's really the conversation that sort of revolves around the pink. Or if there's areas that are infill of something that's already there that's going to redevelop. And these are conversations that you have, and you really want to work for the best information you have at the time, to some degree to a worst case scenario for development, because you want to make sure that you're sizing the plant for what the development and what you can expect for effluent to come to you. And so with that, there's additional 3,720 in the 10-year and 4,443. So what I will tell you is the additional SFDUE projections from the developers, those were direct conversations that Freese and Nichols had with Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes actually did come to that June meeting in 2023 and just presented 3 slides, and they had an overall map, I think, of the woodlands that showed where their proposed commercial development was. There was some amount of acreage, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, that they had, but there is an updated commercial land use projection map on their website if you wanted to go out and see that. I didn't put it in here because I wanted to stay consistent with what the slides were from Freese, but if you go out there, there is an updated, I think from January of 2024 that they have that shows the commercial developments that they're projecting. We don't have that information. It's something that Freese worked directly with the developer on in order to keep some of their stuff proprietary. The infill is anything that really wasn't Howard Hughes. So we maybe do have some other information on that, but it was a very small amount in comparison to the primary developer. Once you look at those SFDUE projections and you kind of set what that assessment is, then you go and you attempt to project annual average flows. So you take the planning criteria and you multiply it by the number of SFDUEs. It's pretty straightforward. So if you take those numbers previously, the 26,599, and you multiply it by the 200, not the 217, the revised 200, because that is a calibrated number, you get 5.32 MGD in existing, 6.06 in the 10-year, and 6.21 in the build out. So that is where those numbers come from. Okay. Wanting to go back and just sort of make a point here, because we may have a question on this. There is actually a buffer, between what would be at plant 1 if we used 191 gallons per day per SFDUE, but because we use one planning criteria for all of the woodlands to keep things more simple for bookkeeping reasons, we're using 200. So that's about a 5% buffer, and we'll get into more conversations on buffer here in a second. But I just want to point that out. The difference between 200 and 199, that is something that is a built-in buffer, which is a nice thing to have when you're projecting annual flows. Lastly here, the question of where did the 7 MGD come from? How did we come up with that? Can it be less? This is the capacity recommendation slides. So one of the things that Fries and Dickels did was they went and had an analysis that they did on a handful of different cities that they served. And they looked at the projected build out for different treatment facilities and their planned permitted capacities at build out. And what's important to understand is there's a really bad practice to just go in and say, hey, I need 100 MGD. I'm going to go build 100 MGD. So you want to have some sort of operational buffer. You want to have some sort of buffer for things that you can't plan for. And so what you see here is the buffer on the far right in the dark blue color is the unused capacity at build out buffer that each of these different plants had. So ranging from 5% all the way up to 25%. The 5% would definitely be something that I think when they gave this presentation, they kind of said College Station wasn't particularly pleased with that from an operational perspective. So, but you can see on average, the number is 17%. Just for noted purposes here right now at treatment facility number 1, there's a 25% buffer on our permitted versus projected flow, okay? Reasons why you would want to include it, we know about I&I, right? The peaks that come through. Increase in wastewater strength, we'll talk about that a little bit, but these are different reasons that cities may want to have a buffer. Unforeseen additional development, and then operational buffer, which we'll talk about as well. So what Fries and Nichols did was they went and analyzed these 4 different things. And so I'm going to start sort of at the top and work my way down. An increase in I&I. Essentially what they did was they went and looked at 2 different neighborhoods in the Woodlands, so one that was newer, one that was older, and said, okay, if we didn't spend the money over here on the newer section and it sort of got as bad as what the other section is, like how much would we think that that could increase sort of across the board? And that was around a 16% buffer that you might want to consider. When it comes to wastewater strength for treatment facility 1, like when you're sizing and capacity, the loading of, the effluent and how, let's just say dirty it is when it comes in versus how clean you need to make it to take it out. Not a ton different that we would anticipate just given the makeup. So we would say there's a negligible buffer needed for wastewater strength. Additional development, what Fries and Nichols noted was from a 2016 to 2023 timeframe, there was basically a 10% increase of development projection in that time. So if we see that same 10% increase again that we can't expect, then we kind of want to make sure we have a buffer. And then an operational buffer for unused treatment capacity. Once again, that's 17% from the other municipalities. That's a good comparative of what to have. 17% would be about that. So what I want to point out is these are not cumulative. We're not saying go 16 plus 10 plus 17. These are ranges that you would want to consider for things that you can't predict. And so these are things that we're not sure about, but we want to make sure that we have some sort of level of comfort for. And once again, the planning criteria is 200, and that includes a 5% buffer for treatment plant 1. If we were looking at treatment plant 2, there would be 0 buffer, right? So with that being said, as we move forward, the capacity projection and recommendation from Fries and Nichols was 7 million gallons per day. Now, where that comes from, and to note, that's a 0.8 MGD reduction from your current permit capacity, right? So I think many of you know that currently the permit's 7.8. We're recommending to drop it to 7 with the change in planning criteria to 200 gallons per day per SFDUE. So with that, there's a built-in 5% buffer between the 191 and the 200. And then there's an 11% additional buffer. So if you take the 5% plus the 11, that's 16%, which is in that range of 17% on average for the other municipalities that we would compare ourselves to. And so with that, from an operational perspective and an unknowns perspective, we would say that that is a good planning adjustment to make. It's a good planning plan to have. And I want to note, because if you're like me and I was walking through this and trying to do the math, I added up the 6.21, right? And then I said, okay, 11% on top of that, and it's 6.21 times 1.11. That's not how you do the 11% buffer math. So you take the 7 MGD and you multiply by 0.11, and then you subtract that from the 7 MGD, and that's the 11%. And then you add that number to the 6.21. So I'll show you a different way to do the math here in a second, but I just wanted you to note that. So something I want to drive home here is, if we were looking at this without a change in planning criteria, and so there's really two things that we've changed so far: the 217 dropping to 200, and the 25% buffer down to 17%. So if we were to use the same SFDUEs, which we have not changed, that would be a 9 MGD plant. So what we have provided instead is a proposal to drop the planning criteria to 200 gallons per day per SFDUE, because that's calibrated to what we're seeing historically in your system. And then dropping it to an 11% buffer for treatment plant 1, right, which the 5% is built into the 200 gallons per day, and then 11% there. So what you do is you take the planning criteria of 200 times 31,042, then you divide by what would be 100 minus 11, right? So the 1 minus 11, which would be less the 0.89. And so divide that out, and that's where it's like 6.98 MGD, I believe. So we did round up the 7 from there. So that is where the 7 MGD came from. So overall, a question of, could the plant be something smaller? Honestly, like when you look at this chart right now, this is based on the 200. What we have sold and where we are today is actually the number times 2.17. So I think Chris and I were talking earlier that 5.32 is somewhere closer to 5.9 is actually what we're contracted to serve you all today. So your purchased amount, which is what we have to serve you with, and then the buffer is on top of that. So the 5.9 would take us, almost all the way up to where the developed at the 10-year would be. So the pink area. But that is essentially the conclusion that Freeze gave at the end of this, was proceed forward with the master planning based on an average capacity of 7 MG, and then continue to look for cost savings opportunities during design, which is still a recommendation that you see today. There's conversations we're having right now about phasing of process mechanical and optimizing the wet weather versus storage. So these are things we've been talking about. These are things that we acknowledge that we need to continue to move forward with. So with that, I am opening the floor to any questions that y'all have. Yes, Mr. Maggart.
Since I had the questions about the SFDUs, let me ask you a couple of questions. What's the conversion from one SFDU to a hotel? What do you use for the conversion to get?
I don't know how to help.
Okay, let me ask you another one. What about a hotel? No, that's fine.
No,
Anybody in the audience?
He has it.
No, I don't. I just want to know if they know it.
Here's the table.
Hey,
I mean,
anyway, anybody in the audience, anyway, that's okay.
Yeah.
So that's my first question.
Okay.
Now, you got, and I'm speaking because of, I just got elected again.
Yes, sir.
And so I've only been here a year, so I went to this presentation. If you'll put this back up on the screen.
Yes, sir.
So this is the management presentation that I saw. And so anyway, the net result is that you got 3.6 of baseline usage. That's, you converted SFDUs to current SFDUs to GPM, right?
MGD. Yes, sir.
MGD.
Yes, sir.
So that's,
What?
At 200.
At 200. Yes, sir.
No,
so
three
anyway,
point six is measured. It's not a converted. It's not an estimated number. You
No,
get
it's
3.6
based on-
by 200 times SFDs.
No,
That's the measured
they
flow.
have the total SF.
It's from this
It's
existing,
from that exhibit right there, apparently. They converted that, divided by 200, I think. Right?
No, that's true.
Anyway. I just went back, I got all the data from the last year that the throughput that's presented to the PECQ for the last year, starting in April 24. And anyway, that for the last year, the average throughput is a little over 3.07.
That's not-
Instead of 3.6.
so
So the point is, if you look at your black line for the SFDUs that you got out there, it's declining.
yes, and so
So the point is why would you take 3.6? I mean, that's a big chunk. That's half of 0.5 MGD or MGDs that you're including forever when you've got this history that it's declining for the last 8 or 10 years at least. So anyway, that's my question is why do you continue to use 3.6 when we know that even when you've gone from 191 to 170 in the last 10 years for based on your sold SFDUs?
Isn't it important to recognize that we've sold capacity? There's a contract out there between the MUDs and San Jacinto River Authority, which are real live documents where capacity has been sold. And it was based upon estimates of SFDUs, which would be inside the Woodlands undeveloped property when that study was done, correct? And you as an organization are obligated to provide that capacity. We bought it from you, actually.
Yes, sir.
We have a contract that says you owe that to us. I think where we maybe get stuck here a little bit, and I'm just throwing this out, is that, that sold but unutilized chunk, which is the piece and that you're looking at saying,
No, this is 3.6. 3.6 is what's going through there.
I know.
According to them, but
But
my
I'm-
data shows it's 3.1.
Okay, let's just
It's a
say,
big number.
okay, but there's a big chunk above that, the 1.7,
we
I
haven't
think
got
that
there.
extends on
I
there.
haven't got there yet.
And it seems that we need to either change those contracts to say we don't actually need that much. And that would be quite an undertaking for us to figure out that actually the Woodlands in its entirety does not need that much capacity. And then restructure everything to kind of shrink down to what we think it could be and build a smaller plant. But right now, you can't unilaterally do that. You have to have every MUD agree that that is what is going to be some kind of new amount that we're going to kind of revise down to some level because we think for some reason that it's changed. And if it has changed, maybe that analysis is important to do and to study and take some time to do that. And then it feeds into, because really you do the 191 and maybe get closer back to what you're looking at versus the 200, which you picked because you wanted wastewater 1 and wastewater 2 to be similar. So maybe that explains some of the 3.6 to 3.1 difference there.
Alan, the other
No,
is that with
it
any,
says that they're using too big a number. They're using.
Well, we have to use some number
Let me
to plan,
finish my
right?
questions. Okay, here, everybody needs to understand is SFDUEs are an educated guess. You know what they used I went back and I was looking at my old files. I don't know why I kept them all background. And the Grand Accounting number 5, you know what the original was? 360. And they reduced it to 2. So I don't know whether you guys went through those files. That was originally way back when. But the point is SFDUE is an educated guess. It's not.
it's a planning.
It's a
That's
planning tool,
correct,
but
which
it's
is-
educated.
Planning is not a science, right?
It's an educated guess. That's why I asked you, there's 2 things that are gonna happen in wastewater treatment plant 1 service area. There's gonna be office buildings and hotels and maybe apartments. As the development company's already said, we're finished with single family residences. They don't have any property. So the only thing in this service area is commercial that is probably going to be hotels. And the SFDU conversion, just common sense. We've all been to an office building. Office building only has toilets and sinks. They're not like a single family residence where we have washing machines and we've got dishwashers and we've got garbage disposals. And so the amount of wastewater that comes out of an office building is relatively small. And the same thing with a hotel. We've all been to a hotel. What do they got? A sink. The only thing they got between difference is they also have a shower. Those are the two things that are going to happen in the Woodlands. I was talking about service area number one, at least, and anyway, I've been here since day one and I've had a post office box over in town center for 30 years. I've driven down every street from every direction of that post office probably 30 or 40 times. And I've watched every building built, and there's not much vacant property. Most people don't know this Betts track, the old Betts track over here. That's probably the biggest facility, the biggest piece of property that we have. Do you know how many SFDUs that you've included in there?
Not, sir.
No, but that gets back to the question that I ask is we need to sit down again, and the people are knowledgeable of the area of the history and what's going to happen, instead of bringing in a consultant and starting from scratch that has no knowledge and come up with these estimates. Now, the next, I'll go ahead. This 1.7 says purchased, and I asked and said not currently occupied. Can you explain to me what not currently occupied is?
Yes, sir. So
we've got, this is a huge chunk of this capacity, 1.7 MGD. So what is that?
So the estimated utilized SFDUE, so from this slide, which is slide 12 in my slide deck, the unutilized, right, would be hotel rooms that aren't fully occupied. So if you've got a hotel that's 100 rooms, it's not always fully occupied. So an unutilized amount, if it's only occupied 50% of the times, and we talked to Visit the Woodlands and they gave us the data, and we extrapolated that and put the SFDUEs in that were utilized versus unutilized.
What's the occupancy rate today in offices in the Woodlands?
I do not know.
Okay, I know. 85%. I just looked it up on the internet. So it's 85% of the office is occupied, and we've got 3.01 or 3.1 MGD going through the plant. So I don't understand how you can 1.7 MGD is just sitting there and it's doing nothing except
purchased.
But no, you said it's purchased or you say it's purchased and not occupied.
Correct. It's unutilized.
Okay, but
Right.
So it doesn't have, some of it's purchased, but it's not occupied, like hotel rooms and offices. Okay.
Right. Yes, sir.
So
that was the example I gave you on this particular slide. There's family occupancy, there's hotels constructed versus, not purchased, or purchased, not constructed, like at a single family dwelling. So that's essentially what those differences are.
So what we were told at the meeting was 60% is constructed but not occupied. 40% is not constructed. Are you saying that's not correct? Down to this 84-30?
I'm not sure, Brad.
So that makes a big difference. Is it all just not occupied but constructed?
What slide is that you're showing?
This is slide 12.
Yeah.
He's looking at,
What slide are you looking at?
I'm looking at slide 23, but it's
On the presentation,
from the, no, you're from the
Yeah.
previous presentation, right?
Yeah, this is the actual presentation that was made. Keep going. That one,
This one? Yeah.
yeah, that 84-30.
So if that's a quote from Freeze, then that's probably correct. So what you got to understand is that,
well, this is just converted, right?
is that the flows? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's just the same charge.
It's just converted with the 200. So if that's what Freeze said in that meeting, then yes, that would be correct, because they're the ones that directly interacted specifically with Hark and with the developer on the pink portion. So If that's what they've got there, and that's what
Pink, this is the hash blue,
the hash blue, yes. And so if they said 60%
but
constructed,
not occupied,
Right.
40%.
I mean, I don't want to be
Yes, sir.
derogatory, but Freeze, you are making a presentation. Freeze, River Authority, it's not free. You know, we stand behind these freeze studies.
yes, sir, we do. And the
Okay.
fact is
Make
that,
sure.
no, I agree. And so I
Keep
didn't.
using the name- you keep
Nope,
using-
nope. So I want y'all to understand though, is that there is some information that was in a direct non-disclosure agreement between Freeze and Howard Hughes that we as the River Authority do not have access to. So particularly on the pink, I don't have that information, but we have been on the phone with Freeze and Nichols over the last couple of days so that I can make sure to give this presentation as correctly and consistently as possible. I didn't have that data point to be able to rattle off to you all, so I apologize for not having that, Brad. But if David Munn said that, and that is a note from that meeting, I believe that that is true.
Well, you got 6 MGD in the pink, or 0.7 in the pink. That's gonna happen in the next 10 years. Most of us have read the paper. You know, they're supposed to build a new hotel outside of Macy's. I've seen that announced. We know they're building the Ritz-Carlton. They're getting ready to build a 20-story expensive condo project where the old library was. But, you know, you look at, and to be honest with you, I can't find, and if it's anything else, office buildings and hotels, they don't ever use any capacity. So I think that I don't care, they don't have to tell me where they are.
Right.
If the hotel's full one weekend, I think we probably want to be able to handle it, right?
And
Isn't that right? No?
I just told you that hotels and office buildings don't use any capacity. Maybe we ought to worry about the
Like
restaurants.
when the Iron Man's here, or is not
Maybe.
everything kind of running pretty much? I'm just asking, I'm
No,
not
I'm
a
just
planner. I
telling-
don't think you're a planner either. So
No,
we use some information to try to use a planning
You-
guide, right? If we don't believe that, then we need to use something else, right?
You weren't here. I went through this 13 years ago when we sat through a presentation and I found out that we had 25% more residents in Mud 36 than
Then we should restudy this whole
No, no,
thing then before
that's-
we build another plan.
that's.
Right.
That's in
Maybe
my,
that,
I
maybe that's
sent
what's
an
really the
email
problem.
and that's exactly what I suggested. 13 years ago, we went through the same routine. And it wasn't that presentation that I came back and I found out that Mud 36, the second oldest mud, completely built out, square mile. I'd been up and down every street. And we turned out we had 25% more residents according to one of these studies. So, and not only that, they sent us a bill for 1.1 million, little square mile. I mean, it was a big hit. So I started looking at it and I went back and looked at the data. And it turned out there was all kinds of fuss, to the point where a lady came in here, previous director, and fell on her sword and said, we screwed up. And thank you, because I sent an email.
Do we have data on this?
So maybe we should do an 8th and final
So,
counting,
well, we have a 7th already. We can do
right?
it.
I mean, I don't
But-
know. We need some baseline to make some decisions on.
Okay, go ahead and answer the question.
Yeah, can I answer a couple of the things? So, the numbers in pink here, which are the SFDUE projections, so the 3720 and the 4443. Those would utilize those projections, Mr. Mayor. So if it's a hotel, then it would utilize the numbers that are in there as an SFDUE conversion. So that is where those numbers came from. So we got square footages, or we got hotel projection occupancies from, or room numbers from the developer of what they anticipate. And that would have been what Freeze used to then generate the numbers in pink, which then generate into the 0.7 and the 0.9. So that is where those numbers would have come from. So you're not wrong. The numbers are smaller, but they come from the data that's been provided on the 750 acres or something like that
I
that
would
Howard
love to
used.
see where they got 0.7 MGD for the next 10 years. And I don't care where it's located. I just want to see the number. How tall the hotels are, how many square feet, how many rooms the hotels. And
Right.
it's question. I said the wrong word. The veracity of the numbers are questionable.
The,
We meet today, the plant meets the needs of the community, right? I mean, we have 7.7
6.8 million gallons per day. That's what you sold us in SFDUs.
Correct.
Right? That's what you sold us in FDUs. So if you start looking at what we're making an assumption here that we're going to build a new plant. That's what this was done for. But now we've heard from Carrillo that we have probably 20, 25 years left in this plant. And so I think that's the focus. And we can talk about SFDUs. And I'll be honest with you, I get a little, I looked at that chart too. And it looks like if we're about 95% built out, right? I think mud 30, what's your mud, John? What's your mud number?
67.
67 is the only mud, you know what I mean, that's in this waste treatment plant that isn't 95% or more built out. And so if you look at that, and then this number here that you provided without any backups as utilized, it's only it's at 75% capacity. So where are the other 26% of the build out coming from?
Right, once
if we're
again,
95% built out?
the majority of that comes from the commercial and from the space that comes from the developer.
I understand,
Right.
But again, you've been analyzing this data for a long time now, and you've told us in previous documents that you've covered all that, right? The sixth and final accounting was
So
it.
every year, the sixth and final does get adjusted from HARC of what is happening on the ground, and that's what's occurring. And then this is from the developer, in addition to what's in the sixth and final is the pink.
But I'm just saying, they're asking us then to spend $300 million plus, right, to build a plant in which, if you look at the community today, which is 95% built out, you know what I mean? That's meeting the needs of a community. Why should we be willing to spend $300 million on a new plant where we can maintain the current plant? Right?
So
We can maintain
Hey, David, let's solve this SFD. The capacity, the design data that they've used is, my opinion, it's not right.
It's designed for 7.8. We meet
No,
7.8.
I'm talking about the plant, I'm talking about their throughput is they're using bigger numbers than are actually gonna happen.
I agree.
But, so what I'm trying to get back to is that the other thing, I've sat here and all the time when I was on the board for 12 years on Mud 36, and I watched the flow through Plant 1, and I watched all this construction in East Shore, and I watched all the Hughes Landing. I watched all this construction, and the throughput of Plant 1 didn't ever change. It's sat there, plus or minus 3 million gallons a day for 15 years. And then all of a sudden I come in to the mud again, and it's gonna start growing by leaps and bounds.
So once again, from a planning perspective, as a planner, as somebody that needs to be projecting kind of a worst case scenario, we've got to understand what's purchased and what we understand the development from the developers to be that will be coming in. And so from the provider's standpoint, if I was working in a city, I would be looking and having the same conversations to make sure that I am projecting in one section of time, right, with the best information I have at that moment. And so when this was done and presented in June of 2023, this was the best information we had. Yes, Mr. Maggart, the numbers are changing. They will always change. Sometimes they'll go up, sometimes they'll drop down. Sometimes they'll come back up, and sometimes they'll drop back down. And that's the thing that we as planners, from a 10-year perspective or a build-out perspective, we have to keep in mind. And that's where the professionals come into play to make sure that we are maintaining the health, welfare, and safety of the public. That is what the engineers are for. That is why we hire the consultants to come in and to keep that in line.
Okay. Let me get back. I think that every municipality, they've got a conversion from standard of 1 SFDU
Yes, sir.
equals 1 4-person residence, single family residence. And so some cities got 10, and some of them might have 25 down to, they got down to gas stations and drive-through restaurants and sit-down restaurants. I mean, they get real detailed, but that's probably not necessary. But the point is hotel room, the conversion is like 4,000 square feet of office, 4,000 square feet, if that sounds right, is 1 SFDU, which, if you really think about that, you get a 300,000 or 400,000 square foot office building, that had many SFDUs when you divide by 4,000. And that's what's gonna happen here, is office buildings, hotels, and maybe a few condos and apartments. But
That is
so
pink, right? In addition to what's
Hey.
going on in sixth and final.
you got my email.
Yes, sir, we
And
do.
what I ask is that we put together a task force, Eric's seen it, and we get together Woodlands Water, and I'd like to be involved, and somebody no consultants, somebody from your group, and we sit down and we start over counting SFDUs.
So I appreciate your feedback, and we've got that email, and we will take that into consideration, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
Arthur?
I'm done.
Well, Maggard presents some, trustee Maggard presents all this numbers. We got no data in front of us, so we don't know what he's looking at. So is he correct in saying that the plant is at this level? Does your data validate what he's talking about?
You get it in your packet you get it in your packet, Arthur, every month, 3 million gallons a day is going
That's
through.
great.
Looking for you.
They're looking for Chris.
I was looking for Chris. I was looking out.
So it's a
I'm just
question.
gonna validate is we've got these numbers up here. Are they correct? Or is your numbers correct?
Fine. The number I presented is there's 3 million gallons a day going through plant one, and it's been 3 million gallons a day for 15 years, Arthur.
So you're saying their numbers are incorrect?
I'm saying that their projections of having these huge increases over there.
Go back one
are
more,
not right.
back to your other one.
Thank you.
I think this is what he wants to talk about.
If you want to answer the question, I'll let you.
Go for it.
Yeah.
You want this one?
I'm confused. So the plant is producing on average about 3.1 MGD, right? Effluent flow based off the last 12 to 18 months. I was looking at this graph because if you go back through history, it has been higher. And so when Freeze did the report, they were looking over a 10-year period. They weren't just looking over the last 12, 24 months. And if you go back even further, what you're going to see is that number was higher and it's gone down, and in some years it goes up. This is some of the operational buffer that Connie was talking about, but it's also why we're using 200 instead of 191, or going down to 160, which is the lowest. So you built the plant for 160, then you had to hit 165, you could have an issue.
That's if you're starting from scratch.
So that makes some comment.
Here.
So it makes all the sense in the world that this has been coming down as people have gotten installed low flow toilets, low flow faucets. We've gotten much smarter about watering our yards, all the things that people would do just to conserve water.
Yards don't have anything to do with this.
Unless you. True.
Correct. Sorry.
I sure hope it does.
Sorry. So it makes sense to me that we'd be coming down, even though maybe the Woodlands might be growing during that period that was growing, maybe not anymore. So if we have this contractual thing we got to resolve, I think you just can't say we don't have to provide that capacity anymore. None of us, I think, can do that unless our MUDs actually revise the SFD contract we have with you. Is that correct?
That is my
Is that a
understanding.
good interpretation, Brian? That
That's correct. And I was going to mention also that current agreement has the 217. So
Yeah,
any
yeah.
reduction down, some of these slides bake in 200, but technically that's not accurate. It would need to be 217.
we could mutually agree to make that whatever we want based on probably some facts, I hope, within our MUD that would justify that maybe I don't need that extra. Certainly don't need it at 217. And what's the number at 200? And do I even need that number of SFDUEs? Is it really a good number based on what has actually happened? Because that was bought years and years and years ago based on some assumptions back in time, right? Okay, so we have to maybe reconcile that whole picture of SFDU count as well as the MGD we're going to use, or G gallons per day for each SFDUE. And that just gets us to the teal color. And then there's the magic pink color, which is based on information that you all haven't been able to really assess because that was under an NDA between Howard Hughes Corporation and Breeze and Nichols. So maybe we can unpack that with Howard Hughes and really understand what that, was the Ritz-Carlton planned in that. That's a kind of a new thing on a little tiny piece of land. That's going to be a lot of SFDUEs, I think, right? So maybe that wasn't in the plan 5 years ago. It certainly is today. So that makes sense to me that we'd want to have the right size plant. And then, to your point about, well, maybe we have a plant that can do that. And we can get it through those next 20 or 30 years. That's good. The other evaluation is, is this the plant to take us through the next 50 years? That's kind of the second part of our topic, probably at the end of the day, is answering that question as well. first part, we can't do anything until we get this first part figured out. I don't think, and let you have the real data to then go do the analysis that we need.
You know, let me get back to this 1.7. There's two pieces here apparently. Purchase SFDUs, that's one piece, and then currently constructed and not occupied.
Sorry,
Now,
what was that, Mr. Mayor?
I said this crosshatch area is a big number, 1.7.
Yes, sir.
It says purchased. And then it's got in parentheses, I assume purchased, which I agree with. That's everybody in every MUD is purchased. And then we've got this in parentheses, this wild card number. And we find out what is purchased, just purchased and not used. Because the last grand accounting, the 6th grand accounting was supposed to be every MUD was supposed to purchase what they were gonna need forever. And it turned out that the MUD are obviously,
And that was 26 FWs,
well,
26.
all I know is the only people that purchased a lot of SFDUs were Metro, which was obvious. In fact, Metro wrote us all a big check. Remember, Paul?
We co-wrote that check. MUD 67 and Metro were the two big
Oh,
contributors.
you were the two big contributors. So we all got a reimbursement because they were the ones that had to purchase more capacity. And the rest of us had the benefit because we'd oversubscribed.
So that must have been 4th or 5th accounting, wasn't 6th?
60,000. The last one, and that was supposed to be the prediction of ultimate build out.
6th accounting.
6th accounting. So all of a sudden now we've got people coming in and saying, no, we got another 0.7 that we're gonna build in the next 10 years. That should have been purchased, it should be down here in this crosshatched area. And when I sent them an email, I would expect that this 0.7 would be subtracted from this 1.7. And
So I
can you
wrote down the question for
Can you
the,
explain to me why 0.7 was never purchased in the last grand accounting?
I would say because the developers have changed what their land use plans were and what their development plans were,
Land use plans.
or what they plan to
What?
put on the land use
Okay.
plan.
Maybe
The square footage may
maybe a
change.
50-story building is.
Correct. And so that's where some of that comes in, and that is the delta between it. Yes, sir.
I'm good with that.
Okay. So what I did write down that you requested was the breakout of that kind of crosshatched area of the 1.7. And we are working as part of the matrix. I think I said y'all have a lot of questions and we're trying to make sure that we're trying to give a detailed response to as many of those as we can. That is something I think that is in that breakout, that we can get the breakout for those teal and the crosshatch areas of what Freeze's breakout was. And I think subsections is the way that was done through HARP. And so we can get that information to you all for your analysis.
I just like to, we went through this at MUD 46, right? Going through the locating these undeveloped lots. And I've never seen anything from WWA about where this land is located and how many SFDUs are assigned to each lot. And, we go back to what I said earlier, 95% built out, but we have 27% of the land not having built in wastewater treatment plant 1. So where is this development? I don't even know what's going to go on it, but I'd like to know that how many SFDUs for this piece of acreage, because we've never seen that. And it's been, to be honest with you, it's been difficult to get because the comparison, counting 5th and 6th is not done by street or lot number. It's done by, the appraisal district, or actually it's done by the Hughes Corporation coding.
Right.
So, somehow we have to have, something we can grab and shake that we can all understand. Maybe Kent and I want to drive around and look at these lots.
I just already looked at the Google map. It's a little bit out.
So I think, taking it back, like we definitely hear you. Y'all got some questions, not some, you got lots of questions on the projections and you're wanting to make sure that this plan is right sized. We completely understand. What I think that we would like to do is let's continue to move forward, at least for now, with the analysis that we're doing at 7MGD. We can either in the preliminary engineering phase, work through SFDUEs again to make sure that it gets corrected, or we can give it to Eric and y'all can bring us what the SFDUEs are that we size it by. And if we need to do, adjustments to our contracts with each of the different MUDs in the way that y'all so choose to do so, we can do that. And so right now, we would like to be able to kind of keep some of this conversation moving, particularly this evening. So if y'all have additional follow-up questions, let's please get them to Eric and we would be happy to continue. I'd like to try to answer.
No, we did that. We submitted your questions. You did not provide answers.
I just want to hear the air on some of these numbers are being thrown around. So for an office space, one SFDUE, and this is from the sixth and final accounting, 3,014 square feet. A restaurant, one SFDUE, 494 square feet. Lodging, one SFDUE equals 1.74 rooms. So, you know, a couple of just over 1.5 rooms is equivalent to a single family dwelling unit. So if there's considerable office, commercial, hotel development, then yeah, there is some uncertainty there, but the numbers are going to be substantial.
Neil, you should realize how ridiculous that is. Is that, what did you say, 3,014?
Yeah, that's what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah. A round number like 3,014, you think that to me that's rounded up to the nearest significant, rounding down to the nearest. I mean, that's plus or minus 2,000 square feet. Anyway,
The sixth and final accounting.
I understand. I got it.
Oh, wait, I haven't finished. WJPA, that's what Woodlands Water was then. Staff, WJPA's GIS consultant and members of the board of directors of the MUDs reviewed and confirmed the data contained within the database. So either that's true or it's not true.
None of us were here, probably.
Okay. But it's true. In August of 2017, all the MUDs voted for the sixth and final accounting, also to execute the contract. We also hired John Knox to do an audit, and Knox came back and verified the numbers.
But it gets back, Neil, it gets back to just using these as planning tools. 3,014 plus or minus 50%, probably. But let me ask you a question. Is Howard Hughes aware, Chris, no, the north part of town center, their wastewater goes to Shenandoah, right?
North part of town center.
Oh, I'm talking about there's monuments all on Six Pines,
Yeah, there's parts of it.
on Pinecroft, it says City of Shenandoah, everything north of
More
there.
urban area.
Right, that all goes to Shenandoah's waste.
St. Luke's does go to Mud 39, but
No, I
yeah,
understand.
it's carved out.
But a lot of people aren't aware that the north part of town center doesn't even go to, even though I don't know whether Howard Hughes knows that. But there's a bunch of vacant land on the research that's gonna go to Shenandoah. It's in the Woodlands, but it's going to Shenandoah eventually.
You can see on the map the little cutouts. So if you look just north of the green, below the
Orange.
there's this big cutout where Memorial Herman is and a lot of acreage and everything else. And so that's the area that you.
No, I understand.
But if you look throughout the map, you'll see those little cutout blocks, and those are all the out tracks that are not served by the MUDs.
Right, I understand. But I just want to make sure a lot of people don't know that Shenandoah has part of the services part of town center. And there's some vacant land over there, and hopefully Howard Hughes, when they were putting out this number, didn't include that. And that's why I think, that's why I asked for that list. I'd like to see the land use map, as I sent in that email, of where all those out tracks are. And I'm finished with SFDUs. If you want to talk about the plant.
I got a question about lift station 15.
Okay.
Can we talk?
No, I want to ask a question. Lift station 15 is an on-site lift station at wastewater treatment facility number 2, right? And its purpose is to move waste from the service area of wastewater treatment facility number 2 into the service area of wastewater facility number 1.
It was.
So that's from my question, Scott. This is from the optimization study that Fraser Nichols did. So what I was trying to find out is the question, it's got it effluent or whatever going down to lift station 5 and from there over to wastewater treatment facility 1. So
Correct.
I just wanted to figure out if that's, an appropriate characterization or how is it used?
8 years ago, before wastewater plant 2 was expanded, basically plant 2 had a small plant with a lift station there. Most of the flow would go to that lift station and go over to wastewater plant 1. Over the years, plant 2 was expanded, obviously. We never really used that lift station anymore because it was just a transfer lift station. And so that lift station's been decommissioned and the force main itself has been cut in pieces because it was exposed.
Oh, okay.
So that lift
So they're
station,
independent now.
they're completely independent,
Okay.
100%.
That's what I get clarification on. Okay, thank you.
I had two questions.
Yes, sir.
Comments, requests. If you go back to the the flows or the FSCs, doesn't matter which one. So I had a simple request there. That's good.
That's good.
So
Okay.
the 8430, could I see a breakdown of that by mud?
I think what we have is by service area units, and when I get that information, we'll break it out the best that we can.
We did
for what
by
that is.
mud and by wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah, yeah,
We have a breakdown, I already have a breakdown by mud.
but I don't
We
care
don't know
about.
where they go.
Right, so that data is something that we've requested for free so that we can get that and then try to get it in the format that you've requested.
Because I'm where Kent is that you look at the existing, I just don't see how we get to 10-year and build out with the land we have.
Understood,
That-
yeah,
That number just seems too much for what we've got available. And now if you go back to the multi-year, yeah, that one. Oh, no, yeah,
Okay.
no, yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things I asked for was if you could update this to the current most recent flow rate and show what's going on. Because this shows a pretty significant drop, and we're still showing quite a bit under the 200. We're talking about spending $300 million based upon an estimate that's at best a couple of years old. One of the advantages we have, every year we can delay this decision, the better we come to knowing the full ultimate capacity for the Woodlands. Okay? So this would say 3.1 is about where I need to be. Okay? And you're designing for 7.
because once again,
Yeah,
the
I understand.
historical is what we use to calibrate.
But,
and I
but as an
understand.
engineer, you
Right.
know the best thing to do is to use data when you have data and use assumptions when you don't have data.
We also have data that is a contract that requires that we provide a certain capacity to you all. So unless y'all choose to revise that down, we have to provide greater than this.
Is the capacity on SFEDs or a million gallons per day basis
Both. It's SFDUE's calculated at the 217.
at the 217?
Right.
Okay,
So
but that's only through the 5.32. That's only the contractual
Yeah,
agreement
so-
is the 5.
this is for the 200. It would
Yeah.
be the,
I think that
595.
597 has baked in 200, not 217. So it's not going to change it a lot, but my guess is it's going to push it up a little bit.
585.
585.
So we've got a contract for 585.
Yes, sir.
But you're talking about building for 7. Okay, and we've never come close to actually needing the 585. Okay,
And we haven't identified where that 585 is supposed to reside.
Understood.
yeah, so it just seems like to me we're being inefficient with our resources if we go and build something for 7 when we really need less than 6.
So the question is we did this study. We worked through, got the best information that we had at the time, right, in 2022. And we spent money for free. So for us to update this, we would have to hire an engineer to come through and do it again. And so we would need direction from the trustees to do that.
If you go back to the monthly chart,
Wait a minute. We need to hire an engineer.
yeah, if you can't update this chart
Come on.
yourself, I'll be happy to update for you.
Yeah.
You tried to volunteer once before, it didn't get you.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions here? I think we've got the matrix that of all the questions that we've gotten y'all's email that we are going to be responding back to you all with. There was a lot of questions, and so we wanted to make sure that we were taking the time to get that back to you and be mindful and thoughtful with the responses and not be rushed. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mira. So, Mira, you're up here.
Presentations. Mayor, if I remember correctly, you said there'd be a little break between the
Yes, so please, if you need a bio break, 5 minutes.
bio break.
Very professional.
You didn't copyright that, did you? Can I use that?
Good question.
Bio break.